Newcastle United were amazing against PSG with one of the greatest ever Champions League nights in their history, maybe English football history, and everyone agrees, everyone thinks that Newcastle were brilliant. Don't they, Jon Mackenzie? You know what that means? It's time for us to discuss how good actually are Newcastle, because they beat PSG, but were they really, really that good? I think yes. John's got some things to say about it. Let's find out what they are later. That's a way to keep you watching the video for longer, because it helps boost it. Anyway, let's look at how Eddie Howe has made them good, because I think we can agree that Newcastle are actually quite good now. And the basics of that is it's a 4-3-3 shape, and the things you think of Newcastle when you think about them are they're intense, there's loads of energy, and they're really attacking, but they want to disrupt the opponent, make them make mistakes by pushing high up with this kind of shape, getting them really high up the pitch, counter-pressing, pressing, and creating chances that way. And there's a few ways they can sort of build play. What else do you notice, John, in possession that you think is good?
Yeah, I think there's lots of flexibility. Like you said, the big thing for them is the counter-pressing, so that means that they're going to want to get the front line quite narrow. And the way that they do that is often to actually squeeze the front line together.
Yep.
And this opens up wide spaces for them to push forward. Now, often what we'll see happening is getting Kieran Trippier forward, because he's a really good he's a really good ball player. So if you can get him into these advanced areas to play these sorts of crosses into the box, it's going to be a really good source of goals for you as well. And what they do to sort of offset that is that they tend to form this sort of situational back three. With their midfield then, that sometimes you'll see, so for example in the game recently against Burnley, they had Elliot Anderson playing in this role, and he would move out wide to, again, sort of cover for Gordon.
Joe Linton does that quite a lot as well, but a player who can play in that wide position, so they kind of rotate positions, right? Yeah.
And then you'll see the other two midfielders sit as a double pivot, and then you've basically got a box midfield here as well, which is what you see happening a lot. But there's lots of flexibility as well. So, for example, against PSG, we saw the rotations happening the other way around. So, again, if you're playing against a team like PSG, you might not want to be so aggressive with one of your fullbacks. Actually, what we saw was because Newcastle didn't want to necessarily build up and actually play up against the PSG high press, what they were doing is they were pushing Burn up on the other side and then switching the back three across this way. And then we were seeing from goal kicks, actually often Pope just aiming the ball into this channel, get the ball down.
It seems like a good tactic, like Dan Burn versus, and it's to do with the individual, right? You couldn't do this with a normal small left back.
Yeah, exactly.
And Matt Targett couldn't do it. Dan Burn can because he's massive. So.
And again, it plays into that idea that they want to counter press, right? So you can shift everyone across here. You've got an overload of players. You know that Dan Burn is going to win headers quite nicely. If he plays that flick on, you've got Isak into this seam between the fullback and the centre back. But if you don't win the ball, then you've got a lot of players around the ball then to win it back as well. And if you can win it back, you've then retained possession much higher up the pitch. You haven't really risked the possibility that you could lose the ball in build-up deeper in the field.
It kind of feeds into the ideas that Eddie Howe's put into the team, like the identity of them with the energy and the high pressing intensity, because if you're trying to play against a team like PSG, and it's a bit of a cliche, but you think they're going to be maybe slow in possession, control things, slow it down, how do you disrupt that and cause them to make errors? You try and rattle them with intensity and trying to force them into errors.
Yeah, but even though in the game against PSG they're then looking to bypass the press, that doesn't mean to say they don't have in-possession ideas as well. And you've noticed a few repeated patterns of play that they use to get the ball down the field, right?
I have noticed those. Now, there's a couple of ways, or a couple of things they often do, and they're clearly like really well drilled by Eddie Howe and how the players build up from the back. And once I find the football, I'll be able to show you what they are.
Yeah.
Where is it? Thank you very much. I've got the ball back. Hey, Carlos Sol over here. What do you think his favourite kind of power is?
I don't know.
Electricity?
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So then they're built from the back. What you do, obviously, you've got centre backs that might split, but they've got these different kind of circuits that they play. So because they have these wingers that start wide in certain situations, they tend to drop into like a middle two like this. So Guimaraes might be joined by Sean Longstaff. It might be the other way around. Tonali drops in, or Joe Linton, whoever's there. But they have this sort of thing that appears, and this player pushes up a little bit. So players are pushing him like this, high up the pitch. And then what they'll often do is they'll move the ball to the fullback here, to Trippier. It'll get to here eventually. And then his pass will be up the line. But it's not a straight pass into Almiron, say, on this right wing. Because if you receive the ball with your back to the play, like this, it's very easy to get tight and force that ball to go backwards again, and you're forced even further backwards towards this direction. And so instead, what they do is they have this player, and Arsenal do this quite a lot as well, actually, is this player makes a run from here to receive it almost on the turn, and then the play progresses from here. And while they're doing this will maybe drag someone out of position, or they're not sure what to do, they cover it inside, then the ball goes inside, and then by the time they've done this, the team who are defending might be shifted over to one side of the pitch, but it frees up someone on the opposite side for the ball to be moved across. So then 2 passes, or maybe 3 passes, they move the ball into someone in space who can help progress them, and then they move from there and get up the pitch to do nice things with it. There's another way that you can do it as well, just down the line, like it was a channel ball. So what they might also do is the striker might drop deep into space. So Isak might come deep like this, and he'll drag a defender with him like that. He'll receive the ball from maybe the fullback. So rather than playing the channel ball, we'll call it, down this way, he'll play instead inside. He'll try and change his body shape a little bit to try and confuse the defender coming to him. The ball will go inside the pitch to the circuit. And again, this ball then moves to maybe here or here, one of the two pivots, goes in, and then straight away again, you've got this player moving up in space, and then Gordon slightly ahead, who moves inside the pitch. So within another like 3 passes, so you go something like 1, 2, 3, you get this player in possession with loads of space to move into, and then you've got Gordon, Isak, Almiron on the attack, and then again they follow up with aggressive pressing energy, and that's kind of what you do.
And you see them playing these seam runs balls as well quite a lot in between.
A seam run, yes. What's a seam run?
Yeah, a seam run is any run between the fullback and the centre back, and so you will often see.
And is this a real term, or is this?
This is a real term. Yeah, this is a term that coaches will use.
Why don't I know this term yet? I need to read more.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, again, the vocabulary is different depending on what team. But I've spoken to some analysts who talk about seam runs all the time. But yeah, the idea being as well that if you receive the ball, as you said, back off the striker here in this scenario, so that you've got a player facing down the field with options to play the ball into, then they often look for these spaces in between the fullback and the centre back to play these channel balls, because either you get Almiron coming in, you might have Isak running through on the other side, Gordon as well. So if you look out for Newcastle attacks, often you'll see them playing those sorts of channel balls over the top, getting in behind the opposition line, and then flooding the box to try and if you've got the option for a pass across for an easy goal.
Okay, so we know that with Newcastle, what we see often is lots of positional rotations, lots of movement to create space, dragging players out of position so they can get other players into space. And then they follow that up with an intense, aggressive style of play. And the recruitment they've made has also made this work almost perfectly. All these players are better. So let's look at the team's lineup that you've got here and what you see against PSG. Because if you are doing cold, hard analysis, what you'd say probably, and we're going to say it, is look at the individuals in the Newcastle team. Who of these would get into the PSG team? Probably Isak might get in. And then Bruno Guimaraes definitely would, because he's probably one of the best midfielders in the world. So that's kind of what you got, these two. But it's because Eddie Howe's built a team, and there's a system that you can drop players in and out of, who will then perform the functional parts of that system to make it work, right?
Yeah, and again, when I watch Newcastle, a lot of the things that I see are what I saw in early Klopp's Liverpool, which was this idea where, Jurgen Klopp comes in, he says the best number 10 is a counter press, and you fill out the players to be able to play in that style of play. And often that will be out of possession upside, and maybe not the sort of level of technical ability that you might expect from a really elite side. And the big question all the way through Klopp's tenure was, how do you get those elite players in from a technical point of view without breaking the system? And I think the same sort of parallel is there with Newcastle. There's a lot of players who are very good out of possession, and the big question is what is the ceiling of this kind of approach? Where can you get your creativity coming in from without having to break that counter press?
And if you're trying to create chaos to create chances, how do you always control chaos? Because I suppose by its nature you can't always control those variables. You're trying to create them all the time.
And I think if you rely on your counter press for generating chances as well, if the counter press stops working for whatever reason, then the big question is where is our
that's the thing with Liverpool, because when they lose momentum, how good actually were they in that early Klopp iterations? When they had momentum, you kept watching them, and I kept saying how are they going to win all these games? You keep thinking they'll lose, and they don't. They get away to get over the line. But when that counter press does stop working, or the momentum stops, that's when they start having problems and they start changing things. But PSG would know all these things about Newcastle. And Luis Enrique changed the way he set up for this game. It's normally a 4-3-3. Sam Tarry did a very good video on Tifo IRL on PSG, which is a shame because they lost this game, obviously, but the video is still good. And he talked about how they play under Luis Enrique, always a 4-3-3, but they've gone for a 4-2-4, maybe you could call it 4-4-2. The numbers don't really matter in formations anymore, we decided that. But the thinking is probably, because it was Koulibaly through the middle with Ramos here, right? So my theory for this setup, and maybe you disagree with me, is that he thought that Newcastle would play this really aggressive high press. So in thinking that they would do this, it doesn't really matter that they're outnumbered in midfield, because they can largely bypass the midfield with their play. So if they've got two guys up top here, Ramos and Koulibaly. I'm not saying they're playing long balls at the top, certainly not straight balls, but if you put the ball out wide and there's someone in space here, you should be able to get someone like a ball into these guys, and then same way Newcastle combine, this guy plays it back, and suddenly you've got Mbappe and Dembele on the wings who can attack. Also, equally, if the ball is being shown wide, and we know that Marquinhos was mostly receiving the ball from Donnarumma, and he'd show the ball to one of the fullbacks who were being left in space, then that meant that you've got this channel ball here to Dembele, or you've got it goes to the other side, you've got Mbappe who can receive the ball and again, either take it inside and move and combine with these excellent players inside, or you can maybe get, because the two, as long as they find a way to get through this midfield three, if they can combine, one will drop, it's almost like a pivot thing, right? So one's here, or one's here, one's here. That's sort of, not a pivot, a pendulum, I'm trying to say. That was sort of what the thinking was, in my mind. He's expecting the press, and so he thought he could go over the top of it and attack that way. Does that make sense, or do you think I'm wrong?
Yeah, I think that whenever I see a team going with a back four and then a midfield two in terms of pivots, usually what they're trying to do is get an overload in the deeper areas because they're going to want to try and play through the opposition press, right? So it would make sense in this situation that, like you said, usually PSG play with just a single pivot and then two, let's say this is another centre midfielder, two eights like this and a lone striker. By dropping one of your eights into the pivot zone and then going with essentially a front two, I look at this and I immediately think of Brighton. Brighton play in this sort of 4-2-4 shape.
Yep.
They recently played against Newcastle and beat them, and I wonder whether or not what's going on here in terms of the way that PSG are setting up is Luis Enrique having watched that game and saying, actually, you can play around the Newcastle press with a 4-2 base in your build-up. And to be honest, to a certain extent, I sort of agree that's it worked for them in the first half in particular.
Well, does Luis Enrique agree? Let's ask Luis Enrique. What do you think, Luis Enrique?
Pues yo debí ver otro partido porque creo que la actitud estuvo durante todo el partido. La idea de lo que queríamos hacer para mí fue óptima. El resultado es justo pero excesivo. Y creo que conseguimos superar su presión muchísimas veces, muchas más de la que lo suelen hacer los rivales contra el Newcastle. No refleja esa diferencia entre los dos equipos en estos 90 minutos.
Oh, good note, Luis Enrique. That was a good note from Luis Enrique. And he agrees largely with you. I just thought of another thing while Luis Enrique was talking to us there, is that these two here, same like Brighton, they can drop in to sort of give you that base so you can outnumber. We're talking about outnumbering them in this build-up here. Because basically you've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, have I done the 6? So you've got 6 players for PSG versus, when Donnarumma comes in, that's a 7th versus the front press of 6. So in theory, you should have enough players, you push these out wide, you can get them a little bit more different angles, right? You should be able to get out a little bit. But what we're seeing is that when these guys were dropping in to maybe offer a pass, like Ramos, they would drop, Shea would go with him, or Koulibaly happened quite a lot, or whoever was there, but he was quite often, Koulibaly was to the centre, I think Mbappe and him swapped quite a lot. But they drop in and Lascelles would be like shirt tight the entire time, which would then mean that a certain pass wasn't on, which would then maybe force them into mistakes. And when you're combining this high press, which can force good players into mistakes, that's when you get joy, isn't it? Like, for example, in the first goal.
Yeah.
But let's go a couple of steps before that, because one of the things we were talking about with Newcastle, we knew PSG, we expected them to press up and get them because they're really good at that and they're aggressive with it. What you have early on the game, in fact, 2 minutes 21, as you'll see, is Marquinhos, who's very good on the ball, is just standing on the ball with his studs on it, which of course is football code for please press me to create passing lanes. That's the shorter version of how to say that. And so they're trying to do that. But you see Newcastle's shape is actually quite weird. What is it they're trying to do with this shape? Because it's not this tight 3 we thought it was earlier.
Yeah, like you say, we usually expect Newcastle to be a little bit tighter here because it allows their counter press to get around the ball in the central areas.
Yeah.
But actually what we're seeing here is quite a passive mid-block approach with the wide players actually sitting around the fullback area rather than being inside. And I think the reason why they're doing that is because they want to actually press from out to in, so they want to make sure that they're not allowing the fullbacks to have space and time on the ball. If the ball comes to them, they are going to try and again force the ball back into this kind of area.
So they're trying to stop the ball going down the line, the channel one, or they?
Yeah, I think that's what they're doing there. Rather than usually Gordon might be more central, baiting that pass into the wide areas and then pressing out here.
Yeah.
They're doing it the other way around. So they're actually just accepting. They're accepting that this player is going to have the ball under not much pressure.
Yeah.
And the idea being that you sort of sit in this area here with the potential to do to do a curved run, which I'm not sure if I can do on this, but this kind of run here, because you're wanting to make sure that you're keeping Hakimi off the ball, because he's a fairly dangerous ball player.
I guess that if he receives that from Marquinhos, if you try and make the different kind of run and follow it around that way, then he can just nip past you and suddenly you're in trouble because you've got these three running at you. That makes sense.
And then the idea is you've now got the midfield overload, right? So you've got these three in midfield, and you have the ability, if Gordon is bypassed, for the wide midfielder to come across, and then Guimaraes can come on, and you've still got parity in this sort of area. But I think the general idea is force them back inside, and then you're then in this situation where you can say we're not going to allow any passes through the midfield area, particularly from Marquinhos, who I think is a player who you can actually almost bait into playing these longer balls and messing up, which is what actually happens for the goal. So you're allowing the two centre-backs to have the ball here and only allowing them the option of going through the middle, and the idea then being that we'll either win the ball back in the counter-press or stop those passing lanes from opening up.
Right, because you'll see, when we're talking about the trigger that Marquinhos, well, not the trigger, but the way that Marquinhos is trying to make Newcastle open up, because if they have this shape here, there's not much they can do in getting forward, but he waits and waits and waits and waits and waits. Once he moves it wide, eventually that's when Gordon engages and goes to him and forces the ball backwards, and that's when Newcastle start to squeeze, and that's when the ball either goes backwards and you're trying to force them to clear it so then you can regain, because Cher and Lascelles should win these battles, really. Lascelles, I don't know.
I think it's worth saying that Newcastle used a trigger presses quite a lot, the idea being that they are going to start off passive, but as soon as the ball starts moving back into wide areas or back to the goalkeeper, that's when they then squeeze. And that's when they become so dangerous, because at this sort of situation, you're sort of baiting possession, quite easy possession, and then you get to these certain backwards passes, so the players receiving the ball in a way that isn't actually conducive to retaining possession, and that's when they start jumping and the net squeezes very quickly.
Let's look at some of the pictures we've got just to go through what we're trying to explain from basically how good actually are Newcastle, how much did they cause problems for PSG, how much was it to do with momentum and the crowd being nuts. So this is the example, right? So this is early in the game. What happens eventually here is Marquinhos does play that ball wide to Hakimi. It triggers the press, they push up, and eventually Newcastle win a goal kick and they celebrate it like a goal, which sounds quite silly when you say it, but actually it helps galvanise the crowd and get them all already up. What we see now when we go on is that this is Newcastle playing with that narrow three from the front forward press. And that will change when Isak pushes out to this guy in the ball, right? What happens here? Yeah,
so this is interesting because now the way that they're approaching the press is very different to what they're doing in open play. So this is what I would call unsettled possession, because PSG, although they have the ball, they have to sort of get it into a scenario where they can have comfortable possession.
Yeah.
And because of that, Newcastle are going to treat this as actually an excuse to just jump quite aggressively. So we've again gone back to that narrow front three. And the idea now is, rather than pressing out to in to force the ball centrally, they're actually going to force it into the wide areas. So the ball comes across to Marquinhos, eventually it's going to come to Hakimi, and when the ball does arrive with Hakimi, Sandro Tonali will be across here to make sure that area is closed. And the idea then is actually we can win the ball back in the wide area because we have the momentum here. We can force them to play where we want them to play, and we can win the ball in that way as well.
So all the things we've talked about so far, we're about to show you exactly how these all work and then disagree on how good Newcastle are, right? So here is Marquinhos on the ball. As we know, this is what's happening now. The weird thing here is that Newcastle are not in their proper pressing structure.
Yeah, it's worth saying the context here is that Newcastle have a set piece which breaks down, and you can see here now that they're not in their proper pressing structure, because as we've said before, in the open play scenarios, you're wanting to have your wide player pressing out to in, so forcing Hakimi to play back to Marquinhos.
Right.
Instead, we've just got Isak here, Sandro Tonali covering a lot of space, and Marquinhos is just going to play an easy pass through to Hakimi here, and Hakimi receives the ball pretty nice. He's used the momentum of the ball to get it into a nice position to play the pass. Now
Ugarte's in space here, so you think the normal pass would be to go in.
Yeah, look, a lot of people have been talking about this situation. I think there's a few things to say. One thing is that down the line we know that PSG are matching up front four against back four of Newcastle, right? Yeah. So it's going to be Dembele. He's going to receive the ball in this sort of area if the pass is played, with Dan Burn probably very tight to him.
Exactly. If he's shirt tight, you have to be so good to be able to control and do anything other than just passing backwards. So rather than play that circuit, it might be a better idea to go somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think normally what you might expect to see here is some kind of third man combination, right? The ball down the line, the winger dropping deep, expecting this ball coming in, and then the pass through then to... Actually, I think this is Ugarte.
It's Ugarte, yeah. And then that third man, 1, 2... So it went from Hakimi into a player higher up and then back to Ugarte. He could then immediately switch it to the left where there will be space because they'll be pulled over.
Yeah.
So
or even progress the ball forward, because as we've said, this is not Newcastle's pressing structure, that their ideal pressing structure that they want to be in. The other option is, I think, even if we go back a slide, the other option here is that there's only one player here with two PSG players around him. Regardless of how good Sandro Tonali is out of possession, two professional footballers at this level in a 2v1 overload should be able to work the ball between them in some way. So that's another option as well. So I look at this and I think this is poor from Newcastle. Well, it's poor from Newcastle insofar as the play's broken down further up the field. PSG will be able to move it forward, and to me, this looks very comfortable. This is
you would expect 15 minutes of like intense pressing.
No, of course, and it's come from a set piece scenario. So what they've done is they've dropped back.
Is that why Gordon so far back? Because he's
because they've dropped. What they've done is they've seen the ball is there, and they've dropped back to just make sure that they don't give away an easy transition. Right. What they do by doing that is allowing a huge amount of space. Look, we've got 6 players for PSG against 4 players of Newcastle, and in this scenario, I would look at that and say, most teams in the top 5 leagues will be able to play out this scenario no problem. Now, what actually ends up happening?
Yes, let's do that.
Is very different. So the ball then goes back to Marquinhos, and what this has done now is, as we've said before, trigger-based pressing from Newcastle. So as soon as the ball goes backwards, they're going to be thinking, right, we can force them to get into scenarios where they don't want to be, right?
But PSG's plan is to try and pull them out of their shape a little bit so they can get the ball to those guys over the top. Yeah. Those 2 set strikers.
Yeah, I think deep. So. Like in my head, when I look at a screen like this, you can see the players are going to jump. My initial thought is just play the quick pass to the goalkeeper, switch the ball out, and start. Because they're clearly going to congregate over in this corner, try and move the ball around the other way.
Right.
And this is not what happened. So this is the tactical cam view, because the goal obviously results from this. So we're lucky that we get the tactical cam view.
So what do you think Marquinhos should do here? Yeah. What do you think Marquinhos should do here?
Well, as I've said, I think there's a couple of things. He's taken the ball with his left foot here, so he's probably slowed it down and made that pass a little bit scary with Isak coming in. But the goalkeeper, you should still be able to play the goalkeeper. So that's an option. You can play it to the goalkeeper. He can move the ball around this first line of the press, and you get around that first line of the press, and suddenly you're in this scenario where actually Luka Hernandez is in a huge amount of space. Yeah. Play the ball down the line, right?
But then Donnarumma, obviously amazing goalkeeper, I would say not the absolute best at distribution, so maybe don't risk that pass of him playing it.
Potentially.
So you got Marquinhos here, maybe doesn't want to play back to the goalie, he wants to keep the ball to draw them in because he's the better distributor. Yeah. So like the options here, so you can see that there's a striker dropping deep. I think Kolo Muani's here dropping deep, you see, and Lascelles is waiting for him to make that run. As soon as Marquinhos is basically going to go to the ball and try and show that he's going to pass it, Lascelles is waiting for it. He then gets immediately touch tight to force the ball up. So this pressing structure of Newcastle is trying to force these guys into making that sort of error, even though it's also what PSG want to do. So to me, it is working because they've had them 15 minutes kind of rattled to these sorts of things. The only obvious pass here they're leaving open as they push in is to play the ball over to the left side to the space where is that Hernandez on the left here. That's the obvious space because Mbappe's sort of wandering over here dealing with this. I think it's Trippier looking after him. Then you've got Dembélé is further up to the right. And so Ramos will be further up to the halfway line as well. They're not really options because to get that pass in has got to be either zipped so powerfully along the floor that it skips through the line, or lifted and then it's easier to intercept.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to say here. I look at this and I think there's lots of options of escape routes here if they want, right? If this was Brighton, they have their double pivot. The double pivot would drop in. What they would do is a third man combination around this forward player, right? So Isak's pushing in, play the ball into the feet of Garte. Okay, Longstaff is on him, but there's a lot of space here. If you play the pass first time, you could play it to Skriniar out here. So that's one route. You could go back down the line if you wanted to. I probably wouldn't because they've squeezed across on here. My thought would be, as yours was, how do we start to exploit this space? And I think you can, in this situation again, you can go by yes, Donnarumma isn't necessarily the best build-up goalkeeper of all time, but you play the ball across here, back to Skriniar around Isak, and then
but
again you're 2v1 in this scenario.
But then my point there is, if you look at Donnarumma, I don't think he can find Hernandez with the ball. I don't think
Donnarumma would necessarily look for Hernandez.
But he'd go probably to Skriniar. But if he does that,
and then you've got again a 2v1 here. So,
but then they're pushing him so much, right? And then you've got to be so good playing through, and they're not being caught yet because this is the build up to the goal. So I would wonder whether it's just getting a little bit too much for them. The pressure's slowly creeping up, and because they have to get it right every time with this. You should always play through lines like this. I agree. But then based on what I'm trying to say here, I think Newcastle force this next error. But you would say it's just an error from Marquinhos.
Yeah, I mean, and if he spends way too much time on the ball, even in this scenario here, he's got loads of space. He has the time to decide what he's going to do here. And instead what he does is he just allows that Newcastle. I mean, the difference between this, the amount of openness he's got here, and this is a lot. I mean, how many seconds are we on? We don't have the seconds here. We can go back one more. So it's 16:00 here, and then he takes 4 seconds on the ball to get to here. That's an incredible amount of time.
I know, but then see that I can see when I think of it when I'm playing five-side, when I look up, right, I ever see the ball Marquinhos, as I always do, deep, and look up. And then I see like the only real options are going to be short ones. It's a bit risky because they might try and cut it off or something. You're waiting for a better option. The best option is this ball over here, I think, over here. Like that's a real ping. You've got to be amazing to do that. So
he's got space and time to do that though, right?
I guess so, but then he's trying to wait for them to come, right? So then he should have an option, but he just doesn't quite get the best options. Still, if he makes this pass, if he does play this ball over the top, and you don't have Lascelles touch tight to is it Moani? Yeah, to Colomani, then that could then instantly be PSG 4v4 basically because they skipped 6 Newcastle players. But the mistake comes. And then what happens is it Bruno Guimaraes?
Bruno Guimaraes here gets his head on the ball. But I mean, even here, like the option to the goalkeeper's easy. That's an out ball. This is what. So the big thing that I have here with the way that PSG have approached this is that they're playing in a 4-2-4 shape in the build-up phase. And to me, that means that what you're wanting to be able to do is, as you said, bait the press. And you know that Newcastle are they're going to be aggressive on one side of the pitch or the other. That means that you're always going to have to be thinking, right, how do we move the ball onto the other side of the field? You have these escape routes to really cause them problems. So Newcastle have jumped in on their left-hand side here. They've left space on the right. And PSG have had plenty of opportunities to move that ball onto the other side. Instead, they end up with this scenario where Marquinhos is trying to do some kind of hero ball out now. And eventually, I mean, even the very fact that he hits the ball and Guimaraes is able to head it, right? Look, even if he just gets a bit of height on this, Guimaraes is never going to be able to head it. So I look at this and I don't see, oh, this is good work by Newcastle. I see this is just a series of terrible decision makings from PSG and maybe a lack of preparation for actually when we're in these scenarios, how are we going to use our escape routes? What should we be thinking about?
See, that's so interesting because I see it as like they've caused Marquinhos to be in this situation where he ends up making this error just by putting the pressure on. Like, if they don't make this, if they don't close him in the way they do, and they haven't been doing it for so long, because he knows they're coming. Like you can see the ships are coming to the beach, and so when he's trying to make this ball here, he's trying to make this ball into I think it's Colomani who's dropping in like this, but he can't because you see because even though Colomani has some space here and he's looking up and he can maybe see this pass. He knows that Lascelles is waiting the minute, like I'm saying, he's going to make this pass over the top, pull through the line. Once he makes this pass, as soon as he goes to hit it, tight. And so that would mean there's it bounces back, and then you've got this same situation. The hero ball, Mbappe was over here, floating around here somewhere, right? The obvious one that was saying, I can show you the pass now. That's where you want to put him. But this is the thing, like I don't mind that if I'm Eddie Howe. I don't mind leaving that pass open, even though it would result in trouble because you've got Mbappe 2v1 with Trippier because you're forcing that error. And I guess that's the whole point, and you can compare it to sort of Klopp's Liverpool. All the relentless pressing is forcing them to make these early, like easy mistakes. Like there's another one early on, which is not even because of the pressing, and this maybe backs your point up. When Ugarte plays a pass just directly to, Tonali, who's waiting here, there's no pressure on him. So then is that a case of them just not taking Newcastle seriously? Is it the atmosphere of it? We're trying to get to the point we're trying to get to here is, are Newcastle actually really, really good? Did they destroy PSG? Or was this one of those kind of one-offs where it looks better than it actually was, and does that matter? A lot to unpack there, John.
Yeah, well, so a few things here. I guess in this scenario with the hero ball from Marquinhos, we talked already about how Brighton play this way, right? And Brighton would do the same sort of thing. They're looking to bait the press forward, and the idea being that you end up with this 4v4 overload, generally with the forwards dropping in, pulling the defenders with you, creating this space in behind that you can then attack. And maybe the idea, I don't know what the tactical plan was, but maybe this idea is you play the ball to Colomani in the air, and he knows immediately to try and get the flick on, and then you've got Ramos looking to find that space, or Mbappe or Dembele, whatever. But the difference between what is going on with when Brighton do it and when PSG do it is that when Brighton do it, they have all of these different routes, right, for getting through that pressure. So we've already talked about how they use third man combinations. They have the ability to be able to get the ball through the press in more controlled situations where one of the midfielders will then end up on the other side of the press with the ball in front of them.
And we saw that quite a lot, especially Zaire Emery getting away.
Yeah. So I think that was the general idea. But what I think is the issue here is that when it's a team like PSG who don't usually play in this way, you're expecting a huge amount for them to just come out in a midweek game and play a very different setup from what they've usually been doing. And I think that sort of situation here, whilst I agree with you, it's in part caused by the fact that Newcastle are very aggressive and PSG are going to be aware of that fact. I actually think that the bigger impact here was the decision making of the PSG players rather than the press, because as we saw, the initial press wasn't there. There was no pressure on them whatsoever. And that decision from Hakimi to play them back and then invite that pressure on then sort of starts a series of events which culminate with Marquinhos making, I think, the bad decision to not immediately play to the goalkeeper. 2, the bad decision to move inside and just slow the play down so that it gives Newcastle even more time to get into a good position. 3, not play that pass to Donnarumma and still have the option to get it out. And then 4, playing sort of a sort of hero ball pass that goes pretty wrong and ends up with Newcastle generating these 2 dangerous chances.
So are you, Jon Mackenzie, saying that Newcastle weren't absolutely amazing against PSG?
I'm saying that the game was decided a lot by the fact that this goal happened. Once that goal went in, and then the second goal was again from a bit of sloppiness from PSG around the penalty area. Once that second goal goes in, you just don't see anyone apart from Newcastle winning it.
Yeah.
But on the balance of play in the first half, I thought the real issues that PSG had actually was not being dangerous enough once they got through that press. There was a few scenarios, as you said, where they worked the ball through. They got into quite nice situations. But again, we're talking about PSG playing a system where they don't usually play, right? We talk about them playing a 4-3-3.
But Brighton did, and others will probably adopt against Newcastle going forward.
Yeah, right. So is this a case of PSG and Luis Enrique looking at the Brighton game and saying, oh, this is a way to cause problems for Newcastle, let's do that. And the tactical ideas there being okay. It's fine because you can do that. Brighton did it. They caused a lot of problems for Newcastle. But the problem being that actually it's not just about tactical ideas. It's about having the ability to know how to play that as players individually within that system. None of these players have played that system before. It's a big ask for you to expect them to do everything at the required level. It's like the Champions League final where Man City went with a diamond in the midfield.
Yeah.
And I think that actually on paper that's a good idea because it causes problems to Inter's press. But the problem is that Man City were so unused to playing in that sort of structure, they weren't able to. The passes change, right? The angles change. Suddenly you've got four across the front line. You've got 2 strikers. You only got 2-man midfield. Everything is slightly different, and the expectation that you can work that situation every time, I think, becomes less. And so, yeah, who's at fault? Newcastle were good. PSG were bad. And it was a combination of those 2 things.
But were they bad because Newcastle were good? Oh, well, we're going to argue about that afterwards, not on camera. And a final question, John. What kind of power is Carlos Soler's favourite kind of power?
Yeah, he's famous because he really likes wave energy, I think. He's got a lot of stocks and shares in the green enery industry.
That's right. What's your favourite kind of power?
Are we talking
authority? I don't know. Is that
no, not that one.
No,
I'm not a big fan of that. But
no, how about omnipotent?
What about the power of ubiquity?
Yes, I'm not familiar with that.
That means the ability to be everywhere all at once, which is really important for Newcastle. Actually, a lot of their players have the power of ubiquity.
That's good. How about the power of flight?
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.